Okay, we're live streaming on YouTube. Starting in 1 minute.
1 minute, Roger. Ooh. 1 minute, Roger. Thank you, Glenn, for my tea. God bless you.
Everybody in the chat room.
Everybody, Roger.
Godspeed, Glenn.
What, may I ask what Bruce died of? I mean, I know he was quite elderly, but what did he die of?
I haven't heard. I mean, there's been I haven't seen any proper obituaries. The Nixon Foundation put out a press release, I think, but I haven't seen anything on that.
Man, very sad. Very sad.
Yep.
Okay,
Well, Wikipedia has fairly long.
guys. What?
We're gonna go.
I want to welcome everybody to the world according to Ben Stein. Of course, joining us tonight, the other Ben, managing editor of AM Greatness, Ben Boychuk.
Great to be with you, as always. Thanks.
Good to see you, Ben. And of course, Mr. Esoteric, Nixon Trivia King, Louis Fine. And of course, entertainer, rocketeer, brigader, lover, sinner, America's humble servant, Benjamin Jeremy Stein. Good to see you.
Good to be here with you, gentlemen.
And I want to welcome everybody and remind everybody to follow us at The World According to Ben Stein on YouTube, on Facebook, on Parler, at Ben Stein. And, Ben, you wrote a lot last night and you were posting a lot today about where is William Barr, and apparently not doing much counting. And Ben Boychuk, if you could read exactly what he said, that would be great.
Well, in an interview with the Associated Press that was published today, Barr told the AP that U.S. attorneys and FBI agents have been working to follow up specific complaints and information they've received, but, quote, to date, we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election, unquote.
So to put it in perspective, Ben, as I brought it up to you before the show, let's look at Wisconsin, what he just said. So basically, Bill Barr, we've all been to a donut shop. Ben, I know you haven't been to many. Stein, that is. And, you go to the front and they say, what can I get you? And you say, mix it up, right? So Bill Barr basically went to a donut shop and say, logic-wise, go to a donut shop and say, mix it up. And he got 100,000 donuts that were all eclairs or, crispy, whatever, and I use that because obviously Bill Barr looks like he likes the donut, but, just statistically, again, Ben Stein, I mean, he acknowledges there's fraud, just not enough. How corrupt does that sound?
Well, I think it sounds a lot more corrupt if you put it in the context of what government does when it's investigating something which it claims to be serious, which is to say, devote a lot of resources to it right away, throw the book at it. When the investigations were going on under the Democratic Congress, there were fantastic amounts of resources gone into investigating Trump appointees and Trump's misconduct on a most trivial scale, even had they been proven true, which they were not. In this case, there was the key element of the Constitution, that is government by the consent of the governed, that was apparently violated, but there wasn't enough of it to justify more than a few days' time investigating it, or a few people's time investigating it. We know that there was some serious misconduct going on. We know that people in some of the swing states were discovering in the middle of the night boxes full of clean, freshly pressed ballots that had clearly not been in the mail, that were just absolutely immaculate and pristine. And these were supposedly mail-in ballots, and they didn't look like any mail-in ballots that anyone had ever seen before. And they were all for Mr. Biden. And somehow that does not seem to have merited investigation. Clearly, if there's fraud on a scale large enough to influence the outcome in the swing states, it merits serious Department of Justice investigation. Why that didn't happen, I don't know. But I think that when Mr. Trump talked about the deep state being rigged in favor of the left, he was way more true than even he knew.
So I just want to ask you a quick question, because a lot of people don't understand this. You've been around, obviously, a lot, quite a while. Not in years, you're not old. I wasn't saying that. But you went through Watergate. What does the Department of Justice do?
They went crazy. I mean, they were just investigating everything like mad, like insane mania. And of course, they had a special prosecutor, and the special prosecutor had a large staff. They had a lot of lawyers, and they also had a lot of investigators who were not lawyers. And they went digging into every nook and cranny of everything Nixon had ever done when he was in the White House, and even things they had done before he was in the White House. And there was just no stopping them in terms of how deeply they dug into Nixon's background and the White House background of various people in what might be called swing state power at the White House. And they just never stopped. They just never stopped until they had enough so that they, together with the media, could kick out Nixon. Now, bear in mind, some people tried to stop them, and Nixon was smart enough to I think, to get rid of some of them. But then there are plenty more in the wings waiting to replace them.
Ben Boychuk.
What bothers me about this too, several states have had recounts, okay, with the idea that, maybe they could root out or clarify the numbers. But the point that I think people need to understand is that how can you recount corrupted ballots? Then the real problem here, the issue, it seems to me.
Well put.
They have no way really, based on the handling of the ballots. The chain of custody was corrupted in many instances, where these ballots would show up in the middle of the night. And in certain states, they were separating ballots from envelopes when envelopes had which had signatures on them and postmarks on them. So, we don't know really where some of these ballots came from, whether they were handled the right way, whether they arrived in a legally appointed manner. And the evidence of that has been essentially thrown away. So they're recounting corrupted ballots.
Well, but I think if I may say so, it goes even bigger than that, deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
And Lewis, I'm sure you have something brilliant to say about this, but they're talking about a giant part of the Constitution of the United States, electing the president. With Nixon, it was nowhere near that kind of level of misconduct. With none of the people who are being investigated in the 4 years of the Trump administration so far had anything like that level of misconduct alleged against them. We're talking about extremely fundamental problems, and they won't spend more than a few days investigating them, even though there is lots of evidence that they merit a lot of investigation.
So, Lewis, you actually sent an interesting piece today about how easy it is to manipulate ballots.
Yeah, so there's a piece in Scientific American, which is not necessarily a partisan publication, in which an interview was done with an expert concerning ballot machine security. And the short of it is that the standards vary state to state, surprise. Oversight varies state to state, sometimes within a state or county and among precincts. And unless there is a uniform set of rules, it's very hard to know if, one, a machine has been corrupted, as I understand the article, and two, if a machine that was processing ballots had been corrupted, you would have to take the physical machine into custody, examine it, and then determine if it had been corrupted. But I think there is an argument to be made. I'm sure it's been made before. I'm not the first to make this, both for and against a uniform set of rules among all 50 states concerning the election of federal politicians, including the President of the United States, because prior to the show and discussing this with Judah and Ben Boychuk, I also saw that state to state, the ballots, the requirements for submitting a ballot differ. So some states require that it be postmarked no later than election day. That seems fair. That is fair, in my opinion. Others give you, including Pennsylvania, a few more days. Some give you several more days. The lack of transparency here is the problem, and the absence of a chain of custody complicates that problem. It's not that there was no fraud. I think there is broad agreement about the suspicion, at a minimum, that fraud occurred. There are a great many things one can suspect. The question is, what can you prove? And the other question in this regard, vis-a-vis Attorney General Barr, is to what extent was he willing to exert himself in the process if we don't know what states he and the FBI looked at? Or was this just a matter of fait accompli? In other words, Wisconsin has certified its ballots. Arizona has certified its ballots. So we're not going to involve ourselves there.
Let's.
But if I may say so, with the greatest possible respect, why don't we look at this and say, this is the most important thing that happens in this country? Government, again, by consent of the governed. Why isn't every conceivable resource thrown into this? Why don't we know what's being thrown into it? Why don't we know what states are being investigated? Why don't we know exactly what they're doing to do the investigation? Why don't we know every single detail? And why don't we have people like from the Scientific American saying, and vis-a-vis these giant stacks of ballots, all for Biden that arrived in the middle of the night, is this or is this not a statistical impossibility? If it is a statistical impossibility, why don't we throw out all these ballots? And why don't we do it again? And if you say, well, it's in the Constitution, it has to be such and such a day. Yes, it's also implicit in the Constitution that you're not cheat. And if it's so important that we have a government by consent of the governed, and if it looks like that's being undermined, is it not worth almost anything to get that fixed? One of the courts in a recent case said, yes, it looks like there's fraud. But if we follow that to its logical conclusion, the results are too horrible to contemplate. And I think what they meant by that was either we have to let Trump be president again, which would be too horrible to contemplate, or we will have to have the election again. Excuse me. This is such a big deal. It merits extreme investigation.
Ben, you actually bring up a great point, though, which is we knew with the special counsel, we basically knew all 17 people persecuting Trump, who they were. We knew their backgrounds. We knew everything about these people. How come we know nothing of the lawyers or whoever is doing the investigating of these states for Barr? I mean, is there no transparency when it comes to being a Republican?
No, you don't get any breaks if you're a Republican. That's the long and short of it. But I've been a lawyer for the government. I know that some lawyers for the government are superb, very, very smart, hardworking people, and some are just time servers. I'd like to know who's doing it. I'd like to know something about them. I'd like to know their political background. We know during the various investigations against and persecutions and witch hunts against Trump that the enormous majority of people on the team were Democratic contributors. Who were the people counting the ballots this time? What kind of people were they? I mean, this is such a big deal. It merits extreme efforts to make sure it's done right.
Ben Boychuk.
Let me roll a live grenade into this conversation and suggest that maybe we shouldn't be putting too much hope or confidence in the investigation by the Justice Department. Maybe we shouldn't worry so much about Bill Barr, and maybe instead we should be thinking about state legislatures, because after all, it's very clear in the Constitution that state legislatures have a great deal of leeway in how elections may be conducted, and in the selection of electors. And so certainly our friends on the left, I'm sure, have thought a great deal about this, and are probably thinking about ways to intimidate Republican state legislators into rolling over and playing dead, which they're very good at doing. But maybe there needs to be some pressure from the other way, saying, listen, ultimately, it would be a very strange thing and a potentially discrediting thing if what ends up happening is something like a repeat of Bush versus Gore, where a lot of people believed that George W. Bush was selected, not elected, and that maybe in the name of constitutional legitimacy, the clearer path might be to use the state legislatures to make this right. Now, I don't know, it may be too late, but at the same time, maybe that's a better option, a more democratic option than using the hammer of the courts.
And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Ben Boychuk, can you please tell people out there where they could find us?
Well, please, if you're just tuning in for the first time, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit that bell in the upper corner. We really do appreciate it. We're trying to grow something here. We think we've got something interesting, edifying, and entertaining, and we're certainly glad that you're joining us again tonight. Follow us on Facebook if you wouldn't mind. You can like us at The World According to Ben Stein. And above all, most importantly, get on Parler and follow us on Parler at Ben Stein.
Thank you, Ben Boychuk, and I want to welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. I want to remind people they could download us on iTunes, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you could download us. We are there. The shows are current, so please download us. Show us the love. And getting back to it, Ben Stein, then I'll get to you, Louis. I just, he came out and said today this thing about, are we ever going to see the receipts? I want to know who these people are. I mean, if you're going to say you investigated, I want to see I want to see the receipts. Just show us simple receipts, Ben. Show us like a week of hotel room nights that whoever was there did it.
Yeah, or show us their billing statements if they hired a private law firm to do it. Let's see that. I happen to know, as a former government lawyer, when you're a government lawyer, you fill out timesheets showing how much time you spent each week and how much was spent on what. Let's see those timesheets and let's interview those people and see what they did. And maybe it will turn out that Mr. Biden did win fair and square. Maybe that will happen. But let's know something about it. I mean, this whole several years about Trump have been about transparency. Now it turns out that if you're against Trump, you need to show no transparency at all.
Yes, Louis.
Well, if you want to see the greatest work of fiction, you need only look at any random timesheet submitted by a government employee, a law firm, associate, an accountant at any of the, what is it now, Big Four? Is it Big Five, Big Three? Those are works of fiction, in very creative works of fiction. So two things. Florida, media did post-election their own recount, and depending on which standard you go by, if you go by Al Gore's standard, George W. Bush still would have won. If you used a different standard, I think it was in question. And the person who wrote best about this, in my opinion, was the late Charles Krauthammer, who said 500 something votes notwithstanding in George W. Bush's favor, it may be a fact that we'll never know conclusively who won it. But in this case, there is a problem with federalism. and I'm just offering a counter argument. It's not one I endorse, but if you're the Attorney General of the United States and you pick up the phone to speak with the governor of Wisconsin, where the election has been certified, and you say, I am sending the FBI to Madison to investigate. And the governor says, wait a second, what about state rights? I am the duly elected chief executive of Wisconsin, or I'm the duly elected chief executive of Arizona. It seems to me that there is one implication that's very dangerous in this entire discussion, and it is this: the idea that Americans, and only Americans, are immune to the temptations not only of human nature in general, but more specifically electoral fraud, and that academics only agree that there was one definitively corrupt presidential election in the history of this republic, and that was 1876. About everything else, it seems that Americans just don't do those things.
May I make a point? First of all, I admire very, very much your historical knowledge. With the greatest possible respect, I think there's very, very considerable agreement that the election of 1960 was corrupt. So with the greatest possible respect.
I agree with you. The question is, and even someone like Robert Caro has narrowed it down to certain precincts in Texas where he is convinced there was fraud, but not enough to convince himself, not enough evidence yet, or maybe there will ever be enough evidence to convince him that the entire state should have gone to Nixon, but he's narrowed it down to precincts. The problem, again, is that without physical evidence, if it's been shredded, burned, trashed, it's very hard. As I said, this comes back to what we suspect versus what we can prove.
Ben, I think the biggest question, Ben Stein, is this: why immediately after the election did Bill Barr not get the U.S. Marshals to every single
seize the ballots? Exactly.
Seize the ballots.
Exactly.
Why did not? Why? I mean, that's something we know he could do. Why? I mean, these are questions that are just any
because Washington, D.C. is a swamp. The leftists are the alligators. People like Mr. Barr are chum for the alligators to follow after and then eat. And that's just the way Washington is. I mean, the corruption of Washington politically is absolutely historically incredible. I mean, in all the important agencies, in all the important law firms, in all the important lobbying firms, Democrats are just overwhelming. And to stand up to them is very, very difficult. Even now, I am in touch after all these many, many years. My God, 46 years since Mr. Nixon left office. I am in touch with many of my colleagues who worked for Mr. Nixon at that time. And even now, we are being, if I may say this, are being persecuted for standing up for Nixon. Imagine what it would have been like to stand up for him in those days.
But my bigger question is, the bigger question, though, that I think it's really mind-boggling, and I'll get back to this. Why did who do you hire? If you're Trump, he would have had more luck with hiring an attorney from, Schmattaville.
Jacoby and Myers.
Yeah, from Jacoby and Myers, or
Mackenzie, Brackman, Cheney, Cusack, and Becker.
Or Jacob and Ronnie. He would have had better luck, looking at
He's actually a very nice guy.
Looking at a bus bench and saying, you know what, I'm going to put this person as my attorney general. Or anything. And it just seems like every pick he did was just, what do you do?
But there's a motivating question behind all of this. Any lawyer should ask, and I have no doubt that Attorney General Barr asked it of himself. Can I win? And he may very well have.
Lewis, you are so idealistic. You're so idealistic.
No, it's an adversarial process. I don't think Barr thinks he could win.
You are so idealistic. What they're thinking is, once the dust has settled, how am I going to make money?
I agree with that. But I would say his first question was, where's my Grubhub? His second question was, how am I going to make money?
No, right. Ben, I think what Lewis is actually agreeing with you. Basically, Barr is calculating in his head, how do I come out of this you know, that I could still go to church with Bob Mueller and eat at the whatever club.
Well, they don't go to church. Barr's a Catholic.
I could have sworn they go to the same.
No, Mueller is an Episcopalian, which is, as Teddy Roosevelt described it, the Republican Party gathered for prayer.
I stand corrected. But Ben Stein, so that, I mean, or Ben Boychuk, that's my question is there any, are Republicans ever going to we thought we had it in Gowdy. That turned out to be a big bust with Benghazi, right? I mean, we've so many investigations and nothing. Do we ever come out on top? And it's very disheartening to people.
No, we don't.
No, because the big power structure is the left. I mean, look at McCarthy. Look at today, even now, among people who've even heard of McCarthy, McCarthy is a dirty word. And yet it turned out there were many communists in the government. It turned out that there were communists in the State Department informing the Russians about U.S. foreign policy before even U.S. ambassadors knew about it. So he was made to look like the lowest dirt on earth.
So apparently my live grenade turned out to be a dud, but I'm still going to pose.
No, we love it. We loved it.
No, well, I didn't. Nobody responded to it.
No, we loved it. We loved it. We all loved it.
You said it very, you know, when you say I have a live grenade, have a little affect. And
look, man, look, here's the thing. It's not so much a legal, it seems to me, and I may be totally wrong in my assessment of this, but it has less to do with the legal process, because once the thing gets into the hands of the courts, and they're not doing very well in court, by the way. I think they're like 1 in 39 cases or something. I mean, it's, you know, they're getting their behinds kicked pretty royally in court. It's a political process. And so, you know, to the extent that there is a constitutional remedy, the constitutional remedy, it seems to me, comes through the state legislatures.
Well, that's a brilliant point. I would even call it as brilliant and powerful as a live grenade. But I will tell you, if I may, since I am the oldest and I went to Yale Law School, where the theory of legal realism was created and nurtured, judges go with the political flow. So the political flow was for Mr. Biden. You don't stand up to that. If the media is against you, you don't stand up to it. You're a little schmuck in robes. You go home each day by bus or however you go home to your wife. You might have to do the dishes yourself after dinner. You don't want to fight against the power structure. Why? Why should you?
Right.
Why should you? What do you care? What do you care who's president? You care about you. You care about number one.
So my point then is, and I agree with you, Ben Stein, very much, but that the idea that we're going to put some sort of hope or faith in some happy judicial outcome from this whole calamity, it seems to me, is folly.
It's worse than folly. It is, as my wonderful wife would say, heart-rendering folly. It's not heart-rending, it's heart-rendering. It's just unbelievably sad. This is the state to which the U.S. has been brought by having one-party media government, one-party media, one-party swamp, one-party Washington, D.C. It's a one-party country. Occasionally, someone really charismatic will come along, like Mr. Reagan, who was really a miracle worker, or Mr. Trump, who was really a miracle worker, Dwight Eisenhower, who's a miracle worker, Nixon, who until the left became determined that they would smear him and assassinate him, no matter what it took, no matter what lies it took. Otherwise, the Democrats run everything. And even when Nixon was president, all the bureaus and agencies, the Democrats were running everything.
Yeah, go ahead, Louis.
Here's what I can guarantee you for the next 2 years. Direct mail campaigns, fundraising efforts by those on the right, be they Republicans or conservative media outlets, American greatness notwithstanding, corrupt people. I'm not talking about American greatness. I'm talking about finaglers who are going to dine out on this, and nothing will be done. They will raise a lot of money. Foundations will be established, nonprofits, 501c will come into existence, all dedicated to electoral integrity, but nothing will happen except for the enrichment of these groups and these individuals who recognize that the more I leverage this, the more powerful and influential I become, but we'll
More
never,
money I make.
we'll never solve this.
See, Ben, he's not a cockeyed optimist.
You know, the difference in Washington, when I was growing up in it till now, is when I was growing up in it, it wasn't all about money. Now it's all about money. And these judges are all about thinking about where's the money going to come from? Which side should I be on? So that when I leave the bench and go back into private practice, I'll make the most money. It's all about money in Washington now.
That's why the one who's the most transparent, who I have the most respect for, is Elsie Hastings. Here's a guy who served on the federal bench, was impeached, removed, and then ran and got elected to Congress.
Right, from an all black, he's black and he was elected from an all black district, right. But that's rather unusual. I mean, you can't count on that if you're white. You can't count on
I would say
white.
he's the most honest man in Congress.
Well, there's something to that. There's something to that.
And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Of course, we're here with America's humble servant, and we are discussing today about this Bill Barr, whatever. I don't even know. I don't even know what to call it. And if you just tuned in, I want to thank everybody for listening to us on YouTube.
Can we just pause for a second and say, all of us on this little panel humbly offer our condolences to the family of Bruce Herschenson, a genuinely great conservative, eloquent, loyal, steadfast, incredibly hardworking, incredibly talented and creative in speaking and writing, a genuinely great man who passed away either late last night or early this morning. To his family, we pay tribute to the greatness of the late Bruce Herschenson.
We say Baruch Dayan Emet. And on that note, Ben Boychuk, if you can tell people where they can find us, please.
Yeah, and then I have a few things I want to say about Bruce Herschenson too.
Me too.
Thank you first of all, thank you for tuning in. If you just tuned in, you're half an hour late. You can watch the video later. Please hit that bell in the upper corner. You can subscribe to the channel, and you can be notified when we're going live. But we sure do appreciate you being here. Please like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. You can find audio versions of this show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and many other platforms where you can get your fine podcast content. And most importantly, follow us on Parler at Ben Stein.
I welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. I promise we will pay a tribute to Bruce Herschenbaum, the last Herschenson, I'm sorry. And the last few, I'm allowed to have a folly. I think he's okay with that. And on that note, I just want to ask you a quick question, Ben, about you being you being an expert witness, right?
I did that a lot. I loved it a lot.
But you've been through many of these trials, right? So it's 3 weeks since the election, and I'm curious how much investigation could have actually gone on.
It's a joke. I mean, when I was working in these cases, these securities law cases, which were incredibly complicated. I mean, so complicated it would just give you a stroke trying to read the documents. It would take months to find that nugget buried in some paragraph somewhere that told you that the executives of this company were robbing the stockholders blind. It wasn't something you could do in a few weeks. It was a very serious project.
So now the other question I have for you is, you being an expert witness, I have this for everybody actually, and it was something we were talking about before is, so you have, how do you pronounce it? L. Linwood, right? Who's one of the lawyers, and what's the woman's name? Sidney Powell. And the question is, these are people with big political careers, and somebody has to ask themselves: are these people willing to totally wreck their careers for Donald Trump if they didn't actually believe that they had evidence that something existed?
That's a very, very good question. I think they would be willing to. I don't think they would have it. I think they have evidence that something happened. I mean, the way that election night happened was just too strange. I was with a close friend. We were watching the news reports on television. It just seemed like there was a mountain moving towards Trump, and then suddenly, in the middle of the night, even though we had been told all through the day, all through the evening, that the absentee and mail-in ballots had already been counted, suddenly they miraculously appeared in astounding freight carloads out of nowhere, and it still hasn't been explained where they came from.
Can Ben Stein or Louis Fine, can either one of you explain to the layman how, because there's been a lot of talk of a great many sworn affidavits. Can you explain to our audience how those work in a trial, what relevance they have, what weight they might carry, and also the consequences of submitting a sworn affidavit that is not true?
Well, you can be prosecuted actually for perjury if you swear to it. That's not true. You can be prosecuted for perjury, and I don't know. I mean, it's rare the person goes to jail for perjury or prison for perjury in a securities law case. So that's was not really my situation. But it's a serious matter to swear to that and have it be false.
So basically, I think the question you're asking is they're basically saying all these affidavits, everybody was lying.
Or some, I mean, you keep, one of the things that irritated me about that Associated Press story on Barr was, it had an editorial lead disputing President Donald Trump's persistent baseless claims.
I know, it's great.
And
the New York Times does that every goddamn day.
They do. They do all the time. But Rudolph Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, who are leading the Trump legal effort, came out and issued a statement saying, "What do you mean you don't have? We've got lots of evidence," and they point to, among other things, all of these sworn affidavits of witnesses who said, "Yeah, I drove a truck from New York to Pennsylvania with a bunch of ballots in it, and then I don't know what happened to those ballots." You had people saying that they saw ballots coming through the back door, or an unsecured back door, and I think that was in Milwaukee. You have all these people coming forward who are willing to risk perjury charges, to say these things. I mean, understanding that their lives will be ruined. I mean, if the courts don't get them, the media will turn their lives upside down, and yet they're doing it anyway. And so, it seems to me that this narrative refrain over and over and over again, baseless charges, there's a lot of base.
That is an absolutely brilliant point. Absolutely brilliant point. I'm bound to say that I think in today's world, in the post-Hillary Clinton world, their lives are at stake, not just their careers, their lives are on the line.
Yeah, but Louis, he does raise an interesting question. I mean, it's like there's just mounds of evidence of people willing to come and testify. And I think Louis, I think, brought up a great point before that was sort of flossed over is what, and I'm curious to know this, Ben, before you go to Louis, why isn't there like a federal thing where all elections are sort of done the same? I mean, we're in a mess right now because nobody knew what the hell was going on. Every state had a different law.
We're a federalist country. I mean, the states are supposed to have certain rules and powers. It's not all supposed to be run by the federal government. That's going to be tested if there is a Biden regime, which looks ever more like there will be. Everything's going to be run by the federal government. You're going to be told when you can go to sleep and when you can get up by the federal government.
Well, the difference here is that these are, to play devil's advocate, we're talking about federal offices and a national office, the office of president, and the standards for receipt and counting of ballots are not the same in all 50 states, and the lack of standardization is a problem. And here's it's not the suggestion of the absence of fraud. I think the argument is stronger when you focus on specific states, specific instances, and in the case of 2000, the state in dispute was Florida. In 1960, the two states that were in dispute, that continued to be in dispute among partisans, Democrats and Republicans, not all Democrats and Republicans, Illinois and Texas. 2020, we should at least agree which states are involved, what the fraud is, and what are the rules governing oversight, chain of custody, and ultimately certification of ballots.
We should agree.
I don't know.
We should agree to that, but the left liberal media machine is just going to squash us like bugs. There's bugs on the street to be squashed by them.
It's
yeah.
These are frightening thoughts, because Lewis is right. I think, another point he brought up, Ben, is you're going to have people that are making copious amounts of money off of this stuff, and nothing is going to get resolved. We are literally going to spend the next 2 years discussing this. We're going to probably lose the Georgia seats because of the fraudulent mail-in ballots. And literally Republicans will do nothing like they always do, because we sort of live in a country where if you're from a certain state, you're never going to get voted out. I mean, it's almost nearly impossible, to get voted out of a certain state.
Well, that's a racial thing.
Okay.
Also, look, the way you're talking, Judah, it's almost, you're almost counseling apathy. And I don't think you are, but you almost are. I think that what we really need to be thinking about is, what does the Republican Party look like in 2 or 4 years, and what does what are our responsibilities? Because this is all politics. I mean, if we've learned nothing else from the past 4 years and the rise of Donald Trump in this time, if anyone has been paying attention at all, it is that politics is essential. And we, as Republicans don't do politics very well. Democrats do it brilliantly. And so maybe, the Republican Party as we know it either needs to change, it needs to go away, something that the ideas that have been percolating over the past 4 years need to coalesce into some sort of new movement of some kind, where we find and make alliances with people that we may not have considered in the past. That we're not going back to the status quo, that we're not going to simply roll over and expose our bellies and just permit the GOP establishment to pretend like the last 4 years didn't happen, which I know they very much would like to do. We have to figure that out, because I'm not convinced that I'm not necessarily convinced that Republicans can never be elected again. I am certainly convinced that the sort of milquetoast, pale pastel Republicans that we've been getting, who have touted themselves as conservatives and haven't acted that way or voted that way or legislated that way, those people aren't going to get elected anymore. So we need to find different, better Republicans. And if we can't find them, then we need to do something else.
We need to have a truck driving party.
I'm not kidding. You're 100% right, Ben. You brought it up on you brought it up in a few episodes. Everybody here is that Trump has changed the party. It's now the party of the working man, which makes, I got to be honest, which makes it, I was thinking about this driving down the hill today. Trump literally got every endorsement from every major law enforcement group in the United States of America. We almost know for certain a majority of union voters, truck drivers, all these different people voted for him. I don't, until the day I die, Ben Stein, somebody will have a hard time convincing me, minus bail and fraud, that he lost.
Sir, I will be long dead by the time you're dead. So it's not going to be me who's going to be convincing you. So you better look for somebody else. You better look for some friends of mine who are young. It's not going to be me. But look, the Republican Party is now the party of the policeman, the truck driver, the guy riding a motorcycle. It's a different kind of party. It's also the party of some intellectuals who say, and they mean it, we think that the interests of these people are best served by the free enterprise system and by not interfering too much with their lives and by not meddling too much with the university system or the high school system or the college system. We think that it's best served by letting them keep more of their income and not taking it away from us, taking it away from them and giving it to college girls. Not to have anything against college girls. I actually don't like college girls, but anyway, but not giving it to college girls to pay off their student loans. I mean, that's what the Democratic Party stands for right now, is taxing truck drivers to pay off the loans of college girls. I think it's a winning ticket to be against that.
And on that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. I'm having a hard time, by the way, for everybody out there seeing the questions and comments on the stream. For some reason, I'm having an issue with my screen. So if
I see a question.
So, yeah.
Let Lewis talk. So here's the irony. Here's the irony.
I want to tell people where they could find us.
I think Lewis should talk more. I like Lewis talking.
And on that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Ben Boychuk, can you please tell us where they could find us?
Well, if you just tuned into the live stream, you're late, but thank you for being here anyway. Please hit that bell in the upper corner. Subscribe to the channel. You'll get notifications of when we're going live, when the videos are available. We really appreciate it, and we hope you will share it with your friends. Like us on Facebook, if you happen to still be on Facebook, at The World According to Ben Stein. You can get the audio of these shows on places like iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher, among other podcast platform hosts. And last but not least, very important, thank you for following us on Parler. Tell your friends to follow us at Ben Stein.
Welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. Of course, America's humble servant, Ben Stein. I'm sorry for the people on YouTube that I can't see your questions and comments right now. I'm sure they are just aghast. And by the way, I just beg of you, if you are on Parler and you're following us there, don't go to Michael Flynn Jr. necessarily for your news. I'm not saying he's not an accurate source of the news. I'm reading that. I just wanted to give that little.
So this is how human nature works. Now everyone will go to Michael Flynn Jr.
Trust me, he's got no problem getting people to follow him. And Ben, I just want to welcome everybody back. We are talking about this Bill Barr thing, and before we give tribute to the person that just died that you guys look up to, that apparently I can't.
What's his name? I forgot. What's his name?
Lewis, you are funny. You are really, really funny. You're really funny.
And Ben Stein, how do people not lose total faith after today? Because I think a lot of people look at you and you've been through this over and over and over again, yet you're resilient and you keep coming back and you keep voting and how do people of this generation look at what's going on and not say to themselves, I give up?
This is the best country in the world, even with all the problems, even with all the Democrats, even with Nancy Pelosi, even with I can't even think of other people's names, Alcee Hastings, even with all these terrible people, America is the greatest place in the world. It's the absolutely greatest place in the world. Stay here, work to make it better. You have the opportunity to make yourself known and heard on the internet, and I'm sure there'll be other things beyond the internet that people my age could not even dream of. But make yourself known and keep fighting for America. Our ancestors, especially my wife's ancestors, who were incredibly brave military men, gave their lives for a government that was run by the people and for the people. Let's not let them down.
Ben Boychuk, what are you telling your readers through the next whatever so-and-so? What is the trajectory of people not looking to, listen, nothing's final, obviously nothing, and the lawyers are still out there and there's still hope. But, everybody wanted Bill Barr to talk. And the second he couldn't even give a press conference, he had to speak to the Associated Press. and just be, I mean, he could, I mean, that's what we've sort of been saying is, can you please speak? And when he does, he's vague at best. And it's just, what do you tell people, Ben Boychuk?
Well, I think what we're telling them and what we recognize is that we have to think well beyond the outcome of this election. I mean, we're providing a lot of coverage at American Greatness about what's happening in the States, and also, but we also want people to think about, look, we have a movement to build. I mean, we really do. This is something, you know, the legacy conservative media. Think about, I won't name any specific publications, but one in particular, which is very prominent and very influential in this movement, has, you know, and really kind of disgraced itself with its understanding of the Trump phenomenon. And they don't really know what time it is. And yet somehow they still manage to draw a lot of eyeballs. What I would tell people is that we need to create new institutions, and we need to identify new candidates, and we need to do a lot of really hard work to take what is essentially the kind of the foundation that Trump laid, and build from there. And because unless we do that, unless and until we do that, we're going to be making the same mistakes over and over, and we'll continue to lose. Trump provided a winning formula. He wasn't always eloquent. He could often be crude, but by God, he found a winning formula. And that's not something that we should squander. And one of the things, I mean, it's very important for us at American Greatness anyway, to build from that and to help people understand exactly what it is that we're trying to do, and not fall prey to the sort of cartoon caricatures of the left.
I will go to Lewis. I will go to Lewis too, because I see Lewis. I see what you send out and the people's tweets you read, and I see you've been very, it makes you go crazy what's happened during this election cycle of election fraud and all that stuff.
The irony is that in 2000, and with the exception of literally a handful of journalists, two of whom include Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, media still believe the 2016 election was stolen. No evidence of ballot harvesting, no evidence of Brinks-like trucks pulling up in the middle of the night and just dumping ballots somewhere at a poll station, no evidence of windows being covered up. But raise the mere suggestion that you have suspicions about the 2020 election, and you're a crank. And most recently in his column, David Brooks, who is the New York Times definition of a Republican or a conservative, more than intimates, that if you believe there was fraud, you believe this election is not kosher, you're crazy. And that's a very dangerous.
He's not the only one, though.
Right, but it's a very dangerous and lazy argument, because the first time Ben Boychuk and I had dinner, I said, I avoid even joking about people with whom I disagree by suggesting or calling them crazy, because that's something that was used. Medicine, science was perverted and corrupted by totalitarians to be used, and it was used viciously against dissidents. You support democracy? There's something wrong with you. You are ill, and you will go to an institution where you will get better. We call our prisons departments of corrections. They called their hospitals the same, or they treated their hospitals as the same, and nobody ever got better. So I'm very pessimistic about all of this, including the fact that there will be Republicans and donors and fundraisers dining out on this for decades when nothing changes. Take, for example, I'll close with this, the Department of Education, created under President Jimmy Carter. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. No president seems able to demolish it. So if you can't, and I remember reading William Safire's memoir about the Nixon White House. Was it before the fall, Ben, Air Doctor?
Yes.
Yeah, and he said that Nixon got obsessed about this. I think it was an Army Navy building, and he just wanted to take it down. It was an eyesore, and it was just a waste of money. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. So if you can't take down a building that's not even in use, what are you going to do about departments?
It was a temporary buildings along near Independence Avenue, near the reflecting pool. I remember it very well. And I think your point about the Soviets saying that people who disagreed with communism and totalitarianism were mentally ill, and not only that, they were drugged. They were drugged with antidepressants, which the authorities knew would make them suicidal. So it was a way of killing them. It was a way of giving them a
wait. They fell. They fell.
Yeah, they fell.
They had a lot of falls in those hospitals.
Right. Like Jeffrey Epstein fell.
Yes.
Or like Joe Biden fell, or his with his dog. I would I'd be
those dogs, as I've told you, Judah. Those dogs are vicious when they sense weakness.
Can we talk about Bruce Hornsby now?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's talk about Bruce. He was a great guy.
Well said.
A good writer, a good historian, brave, loyal, talented, hardworking. Can't say much more about a man than that.
I was really, there are people who come into your life in unexpected ways. I had the honor and the pleasure of working with Bruce Herschenson at the Claremont Institute when he was a distinguished fellow there. But really what I would say about him is that I probably would not be politically conservative in any meaningful way if it hadn't been for him. And it was because of those little 5-minute debates that he did with John Tunney and then later with Bill Press, but the John Tunney debates that he did on KABC Eyewitness News in the mid 1980s. And my father, that was the only news that he wanted to watch. He would get home at 5 and he would turn on the news and we would watch the 5 o'clock broadcast and the 6 o'clock broadcast. And Herschenson was on there with John Tunney and they would battle it out. And that was really the beginning of my political education. And I got to meet him and work with him at the Claremont Institute. And he was just the sweetest man. And he was incredibly generous with his time. And he was a brilliant teacher. And I last saw him just before the 2016 election. He wasn't particularly keen on Trump, but he was super sharp, extremely learned, well-read, brilliant writer, and I will surely miss him.
Did not give an inch about Nixon either. I mean,
right.
Never, when so many other people from the Nixon White House were turning coats and doing whatever they could to raise a buck by writing mean things about Nixon. He was a loyal friend.
Yes.
He took me to lunch at the place is called Lemonade. There's more than one, but he took me to lunch at the Lemonade restaurant cafeteria in Brentwood because I had said some nice things. I said many nice things about his novel Passport, which opens in 1960 Hong Kong. He called me up and he said, "I'd like to take you to lunch." I said, "You don't have to do that." And he said, "No, I want to take you." And I picked his brain. I said, "Do you think," as my former college roommate who is ethnically Chinese and from Malaysia, "do you think that Hong Kong will change China more than China will change Hong Kong?" And he said, "No." And he said, "I don't believe in left or right, liberal or conservative. I believe in anarchy and tyranny." And he said in 1960, Hong Kong was the most amazing place in the world. And then I asked him about Nixon and Reagan. And he was very honest about Reagan. He said, I didn't know him well. I voted for him, but I didn't, but there was not a doubt in his mind that Nixon was the smartest president that he had met or worked with. He started with Lyndon Johnson, who made him the head of the U.S. Information Agency, and then Nixon. And he also had some exposure to Reagan. But he told me a story. He said, because he was so proud about all the countries he had visited. And he said, I was sitting with Nixon at his house. And I said, I just came back from what will have been what is now, my 100th.
No, I'm sorry,
I've just come back. He was saying to Nixon, he said, I've just come back from my 100th country that I've visited, or whatever the number was. It was a big number. And he said, Nixon looked at him, there was silence, and he said, I know somebody who's been to more countries. And then they started laughing, because of course the president has been to more countries than Bruce Herschenson, but they had a laugh about that. And he was great. He was just, and I didn't know at the time. I was a fool. I was a knave. I was naive. I was an idiot. I was worse than I am now. That he wrote and directed years of lightning, days of drums.
And on that note, Ben Stein, we want to thank you again. You are America's humble servant, of course. I want to thank everybody that was listening and watching on our YouTube channel. Sorry I couldn't see the comments. Little glitch in my screen.
Wait a minute. Was that truck that crashed into the junction box for the computer?
Yes, it did. Something happened. I had a bunch of boxes and the computer hit them in the back of the U-Haul. And I want to thank everybody out there for listening. I want to remind everybody they could find us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. Ben Boychuk, we seem to be doing pretty well there. And I know you keep up to date and you comment on the commenters.
Yeah, I sure do. And we appreciate everybody who's following. Please share, please tell your friends. But thank you for tuning in. We're trying to grow something interesting and fun and edifying and entertaining. And so
not that you'll smoke, that you'll watch.
Right.
And of course, you can find Louis Fine on Parler at L Fine. You can find Ben Boychuk on Parler at, say it, Ben.
B Boychuk 3, BBOYCHUK 3 on Parler. And of course, check out American Greatness at www.amgreatness.com.
And of course, check out American Spectator, where Ben always contributes his daily diaries, spectator.org. And you can find Ben Stein at Ben Stein. You can find me at Judah Friedman on Parler. I want to thank everybody that was listening and watching tonight. God bless, Godspeed. We will see you Thursday night, same time, 7 p.m.
No pasaron.
Have a great night. Great night, guys.
Cheers, everybody.